The alarm clock screamed at 6 in the morning, and I groaned, reaching across the bed to silence it. My hand landed on something unexpected. Smooth fabric.
A tie.
I opened my eyes slowly, blinking away the fog of sleep, and found myself staring at a navy blue suit hanging on my side of the closet. That was strange. I never wore suits. That was Rachel's thing. She was the corporate attorney who lived in power suits and court heels. I turned over, expecting to see her already awake and scrolling through her phone, mentally preparing for another day of depositions and legal battles. Instead, I found her sprawled across her side of the bed, snoring softly, one arm flung over her face. Her hair was messy, and she was wearing one of my old college t-shirts. The ratty one with the faded logo that I refused to throw away. Something felt off. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and that's when I noticed my reflection in the mirror across the room. My jaw dropped. My hair was longer, falling past my shoulders in soft waves. I touched my face, feeling the smoothness of skin that hadn't seen a razor in what felt like forever. And my body. My chest felt different. Fuller. I looked down and nearly fell out of bed. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I jumped up and rushed to the bathroom, flipping on the light. The face staring back at me in the mirror was mine, but also not mine. The features were the same, but softer, more feminine. My shoulders were narrower, my waist smaller. I was wearing pajamas I didn't recognize, soft cotton shorts, and a tank top that fit in ways my clothes never had before. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Instead, I heard Rachel's voice from the bedroom, deep and groggy. "Babe, turn off the light. It's too early." I spun around and saw her sitting up in bed, rubbing her eyes. Except it wasn't exactly Rachel. Her face was the same, her green eyes, and that little scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood bike accident. But everything else was different. Her shoulders were broader, her jaw more angular. She scratched her chest absently, and I saw muscles I'd never seen on her before. "Rachel." My voice came out higher than I expected, and I clapped a hand over my mouth. She looked at me, confused. "Yeah? What's wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" I pointed at her, then at myself. "What's wrong with us?" She frowned, swinging her legs out of bed. She stood up, and I realized she was taller than me now. By a lot. She walked over to the mirror, and her eyes widened. For a moment, we just stood there, side by side, staring at our reflections. "Okay," she said slowly. "This is weird." "Weird." I laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "This is insane. How did this happen?" She ran a hand through her short hair. When had it gotten short? Last night, it had been past her shoulders. "I don't know. Maybe we're dreaming." I pinched myself hard on the arm.
Ow. Nope.
Definitely awake. Rachel turned to me, her expression shifting from confusion to something else. Curiosity? She reached out and touched my shoulder, as if testing whether I was real. "You feel real." "Of course I'm real." I stepped back, wrapping my arms around myself. "We need to figure out what happened. Did we eat something weird? Drink something?" "I had leftover pizza," she said, shaking her head. "And you had that salad you've been obsessing over." I tried to think back to the night before. We'd gotten home late from dinner at her parents' house. Her mom had made her famous lasagna, and we'd stayed longer than planned because her dad wanted to show us his new grill. We'd come home, changed into our pajamas, and gone to bed. Nothing out of the ordinary. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, pacing the bathroom. "People don't just wake up in different bodies." Rachel was silent for a moment, and when I looked at her, she had that thoughtful expression she always got when she was working through a complicated legal argument. "Okay, let's think about this logically. If this is real, and we've somehow switched, then we need to figure out how to switch back." "How do we do that?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Do we Google it? Call a doctor?" She snorted. "Yeah, let me just tell my receptionist that my husband and I swapped bodies overnight. That'll go over well." Despite everything, I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest. "Okay, fair point." She walked past me, back into the bedroom, and started getting dressed. Or trying to. She pulled out one of her blazers from the closet, then stared at it. This isn't going to fit me now, is it? I looked down at myself, then at the clothes hanging in my side of the closet. Jeans, t-shirts, hoodies. None of it was going to work. We're going to have to wear each other's clothes. Rachel turned to me, and for the first time since we'd woken up, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. I have court today. At 9. There's no way I can miss it. My stomach dropped. And I have a meeting with my editor at 10. We stared at each other, the weight of the situation settling over us like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about figuring out what had happened. We had lives, jobs, responsibilities. And somehow, we were going to have to navigate them in each other's bodies. Rachel took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Even in my old t-shirt, she looked more confident than I felt. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get through today. We'll figure out the rest later. Get through today? I repeated. Rachel, I don't know how to be you. I don't know how to argue a case in court. And I don't know how to do whatever it is you do, she shot back. Then she softened, stepping closer to me. But we don't have a choice. We'll help each other. I'll walk you through what I need you to do, and you'll do the same for me.
Deal.
I wanted to argue, to say that this was impossible, but looking at her, at the determination in her eyes, I knew she was right. We didn't have a choice. I nodded slowly.
Deal.
The next hour was chaos. Rachel pulled out one of her favorite pantsuits, a charcoal gray number that she wore to all her big cases. She handed it to me, and I stared at it like it was a foreign object. I don't know how to put this on. She sighed. It's not that hard. Pants go on first, then the blouse, then the blazer. What about underwear? I asked, my face heating up. She walked over to her dresser and pulled out a drawer, gesturing to the neatly folded contents. Take your pick. I grabbed something that looked simple, trying not to think too hard about it, and retreated to the bathroom. Getting dressed felt like trying to solve a puzzle I didn't have the pieces for. Everything fit differently, and I couldn't figure out how to button the blouse without it looking weird. By the time I emerged, Rachel was already dressed in one of my casual outfits, jeans and a button-up shirt. She looked comfortable, natural even, which only made me feel worse. Here, let me help, she said, walking over and fixing my collar. Her hands were steady, efficient. You're going to be fine. Just remember, confidence is key. Walk into that courtroom like you own it. Easy for you to say, I muttered. You've been doing this for years. She smiled, a small, reassuring smile. And you've been supporting me through all of it. You know more than you think you do. I wanted to believe her, but as I looked at myself in the mirror, all I saw was someone playing dress up. The suit fit, but it didn't feel like mine. None of this felt like mine. Rachel handed me her briefcase, going over the details of the case. It was a contract dispute, something about breach of terms and damages. She spoke quickly, throwing out legal jargon like it was second nature, and I tried to keep up, scribbling notes on my phone. Wait, slow down, I said, holding up a hand. What's a deposition again? She paused, then laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. Okay, maybe I'm going too fast. A deposition is when you ask the other side questions under oath before the trial. You already did that part. Today, you're just making your opening argument. Just, I repeated. Rachel, I write articles about food trends. I don't stand in front of judges and argue. She put her hands on my shoulders, looking me straight in the eye. You can do this. I believe in you. I wanted to feel reassured, but all I felt was terrified. We left the house together, Rachel driving because I didn't trust myself behind the wheel in this body. Everything felt different, from the way I sat to the way I saw the road. She dropped me off at the courthouse, giving me one last pep talk before I got out of the car. Remember, confidence. And if you get stuck, just refer to your notes. The judge knows me, so he'll be patient. I nodded, gripping the briefcase like a lifeline. What about you? What are you going to do? She grinned, a mischievous glint in her eye. I'm going to pretend to be a freelance writer. How hard can it be? I wanted to laugh, but I was too nervous. I watched her drive away, then turned and walked into the courthouse. The building was massive, all marble and high ceilings, and I felt impossibly small as I made my way through security. People greeted me, calling me by Rachel's name, and I smiled and nodded, hoping I looked like I belonged. The courtroom was just as intimidating as I'd imagined. The judge sat at the front, looking stern and impatient, and the opposing counsel was already seated, shuffling through papers. I took my place at the table, setting down the briefcase and pulling out the notes Rachel had prepared. My hands were shaking. The judge called the court to order, and I stood, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. I opened my mouth to speak, and for a terrifying moment, nothing came out. Then I looked down at the notes, took a deep breath, and started reading. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but I kept going, pushing through the nerves. I talked about the contract, the breach, the damages. I stumbled over a few terms, but the judge didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did, and he was just being kind. By the time I finished, I was sweating, my hands clenched around the edge of the table. The opposing counsel stood to make their argument, and I sat down, exhaling slowly. I'd done it. I'd actually done it. Meanwhile, Rachel was having her own adventure. She'd arrived at the coffee shop where I was supposed to meet my editor, a woman named Claire who is notoriously picky about deadlines and quality. Rachel ordered a coffee black because that's what I always got, and waited at a corner table, scrolling through my laptop. Claire arrived right on time, her usual no-nonsense expression firmly in place. "You're late," she said, even though Rachel was sitting there 5 minutes early. Rachel bit back a retort, remembering that this was my job on the line. "Sorry, traffic." Claire sat down, pulling out a notebook. "Let's get to it. I need your piece on sustainable seafood by Friday. And it better be good." The last one was fine, but fine doesn't cut it anymore. Rachel nodded, pretending to take notes. She had no idea what sustainable seafood even meant, but she wasn't about to admit that. "Absolutely. I've got some great angles." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" Rachel's mind raced. What would I write about? She thought back to all the times she'd listened to me talk about my work, the passion in my voice when I discussed food ethics and sourcing, the impact of overfishing on local communities, how restaurants are shifting to more responsible practices. Claire seemed satisfied.
Good.
"I want a draft by Wednesday so I can give notes." Rachel smiled, hoping it looked confident. "You got it." As Claire left, Rachel let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She looked down at the laptop, at the half-written draft I'd started the day before. This was going to be harder than she thought. By the time we met back at home that evening, we were both exhausted. I collapsed on the couch, kicking off Rachel's heels and wincing at the blisters forming on my feet. "How do you wear those things every day?" She laughed, loosening the collar of my shirt. "Practice." "How did court go?" "Terrifying," I admitted. "But I think I did okay. The judge didn't throw me out, so that's a win." She sat down next to me, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. The strangeness of the situation hadn't worn off, but there was something comforting about being here, together, even if everything else was upside down. "We're going to figure this out," she said softly. I nodded, leaning my head against her shoulder.
"Yeah.
"We will." But as the days turned into weeks, and we still hadn't switched back, I started to wonder if we ever would. And more than that, I started to notice things I'd never seen before. The way Rachel navigated my world with a confidence I'd never felt. The way I learned to stand up straighter, speak louder, take up space in ways I'd always been too afraid to. We were living each other's lives, but in the process, we were learning what it meant to truly understand each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point. The first few days were a blur of awkward fumbling and whispered instructions over the phone. Rachel would call me during her lunch breaks, walking me through the intricacies of her cases, explaining terms I'd only ever heard in passing. I, in turn, sent her long text messages about my editor's quirks, the tone she preferred in articles, and the contacts I'd spent years cultivating. But it was the small, everyday things that proved to be the hardest. On the third morning, I stood in front of Rachel's makeup collection, utterly baffled. There were brushes of every size, palettes with colors I couldn't name, and bottles of things I didn't even know existed. Rachel always looked so polished, so put together, and I never realized how much effort went into it. I called her, my voice tinged with desperation. I don't know what to do with all this. She laughed on the other end, and I could hear the sounds of traffic in the background. She was on her way to interview a local chef for one of my pieces. Just keep it simple. Foundation, a little blush, mascara. You don't need to go full glam for court. Foundation, I repeated, picking up a bottle and squinting at it. Which one is that? She walked me through it, patient but amused, and by the time I hung up, I looked somewhat presentable. My eyeliner was crooked, and I'd applied too much blush on one side, but it would have to do. Rachel, on the other hand, was discovering the challenges of navigating the world as a man. She'd always been assertive, confident, but now she found that people listened to her differently. When she walked into the interview with the chef, he immediately started talking to her about sports, assuming she'd be interested. She played along, nodding and laughing at the right moments, but inside, she was frustrated. He didn't take me seriously until I started asking technical questions, she told me that night, pacing the living room. And even then, he kept trying to dumb things down. I frowned, setting down the case files I'd been reviewing. Welcome to my world. She stopped pacing, looking at me. Is that what it's like for you? All the time? I shrugged. Not all the time. But yes, sometimes. People make assumptions. She sat down next to me, her expression thoughtful. I never realized how exhausting it is to be you. I admitted. Everyone expects you to have all the answers, to be perfect all the time. It's a lot of pressure. She smiled, a sad, wry smile.
Yeah,
it is. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our new understanding settling between us. This wasn't just about swapping bodies. It was about walking in each other's shoes, literally, and seeing the world through each other's eyes. As the weeks went on, we started to adapt. I got better at applying makeup, at walking in heels without wobbling. I learned to speak with authority in the courtroom, to project confidence even when I felt like I was drowning. Rachel, meanwhile, threw herself into my work with a passion I hadn't expected. She spent hours researching, interviewing sources, crafting sentences that flowed in ways I'd always struggled to achieve. You're really good at this, I told her one evening, reading over a draft she'd written. Better than me, actually. She looked up from her laptop, surprised. That's not true. It is, I insisted. You have a way with words. I always thought writing was my thing, but you've taken it to another level. She blushed, something I'd rarely seen her do. I think I'm just channeling you. The way you talk about food, the passion you have for it. It's inspiring. I felt a lump form in my throat. You really think so? She nodded. I always have. I just never told you. We were learning so much about each other, things we'd never taken the time to notice before. And with each passing day, the fear of being stuck like this started to fade, replaced by something else. Gratitude. Understanding. Love, in a way we'd never experienced before. But not everything was smooth sailing. About a month in, I had to attend one of Rachel's firm events, a fancy dinner with all the partners and their spouses. Rachel had coached me extensively, drilling me on names and faces, making sure I knew who was who and what topics to avoid. Remember, don't talk about politics with Gerald. He gets really worked up, she said, adjusting my tie. And Patricia loves to gossip, so just smile and nod. I nodded, feeling like I was preparing for a performance. Got it. The dinner was held at an upscale restaurant downtown, all dim lighting and expensive wine. I walked in and immediately, people started approaching me, shaking my hand and making small talk. I smiled and nodded, trying to remember everything Rachel had told me. But then Gerald cornered me, a glass of scotch in hand, and started talking about a case Rachel had worked on months ago. I had no idea what he was talking about, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. So, what do you think about the appeal? He asked, leaning in conspiratorially. I blinked. The appeal? He frowned. Yeah, the one you filed last week. Bold move, going after the statute of limitations like that. I had no idea what he was talking about. Rachel hadn't mentioned anything about an appeal. I opened my mouth, searching for something to say, when Patricia appeared at my elbow, saving me. "Gerald, stop boring her with work talk," she said, linking her arm through mine. "Come on, let's get some appetizers." I shot her a grateful look and let her lead me away. She chattered on about her recent vacation, and I nodded along, relieved to be out of the hot seat. But the close call rattled me. When I got home that night, I confronted Rachel. "You didn't tell me about the appeal." She looked up from the couch, where she was watching a documentary about fishing practices. "What appeal?" "The one Gerald kept asking me about." Her eyes widened.
Oh, that.
I didn't think it was a big deal. "It's just a procedural thing." "It was a big deal to me," I said, my voice rising. I looked like an idiot. She stood up, crossing the room to where I was standing. "I'm sorry. I should have told you." I sighed, the anger draining out of me. "It's fine. I just wish we could go back to normal." She took my hands, looking at me intently. "Do you really?" I paused, considering the question.
Did I want to go back?
Back to the life where I was always second-guessing myself, where I felt like I was living in Rachel's shadow. Or had this strange, impossible situation taught me something I needed to learn? "I don't know," I admitted. She squeezed my hands. "Me neither." The truth was, as much as we both wanted to switch back, there was a part of us that didn't. We were learning, growing, becoming better versions of ourselves. And in the process, we were falling in love all over again. One Saturday morning, I woke up early and decided to make breakfast. Rachel was still asleep, sprawled across the bed in that way she always did, taking up more space than she needed. I smiled, pulling on a robe, and headed to the kitchen. Cooking had always been my thing, but now, in this body, everything felt different. My hands moved with a precision I'd never had before, and I found myself experimenting, trying new techniques and flavors. By the time Rachel woke up, I had a full spread laid out on the table. Pancakes, eggs, fresh fruit, and even a pot of coffee. She walked into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, and stopped short.
Wow.
"What's all this?" "Breakfast," I said, grinning. I felt like cooking. She sat down, looking at the food with a mixture of surprise and appreciation. "This looks amazing." We ate together, talking and laughing, and for a moment, it felt like everything was normal. Or maybe better than normal. We were more present with each other, more aware of the little things we'd taken for granted. "I've been thinking," Rachel said, setting down her fork. "Maybe we should see a doctor. Or a therapist. Someone who can help us figure out what happened." I nodded slowly. That's probably a good idea. But deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Because if we figured out how to switch back, would we lose this connection we'd built? Would we go back to being the same people we were before, oblivious to each other's struggles? We scheduled an appointment with a therapist, a woman named Dr. Ellis who specialized in unusual cases. She listened to our story with a calm, measured expression, taking notes as we spoke. "This is certainly unique," she said when we finished. "But I think the more important question is, what do you want?" Rachel and I exchanged a glance. "We want to switch back," I said. "Do you?" Dr. Ellis asked, her gaze sharp. "Or, do you feel like you should want that?" I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it. She had a point. Did I want to go back to my old life? Or had I grown to love the person I was becoming? Rachel spoke up, her voice quiet. "I think we're scared. Scared that if we switch back, we'll lose what we've gained." Dr. Ellis nodded. "That's understandable. But the growth you've experienced doesn't have to disappear. You can take what you've learned and apply it to your lives, no matter what bodies you're in." Her words stayed with me long after we left her office. That night, lying in bed next to Rachel, I thought about everything we'd been through. The fear, the confusion, the moments of laughter and connection. And I realized that maybe this wasn't about switching back. Maybe it was about learning to be better partners, better people, no matter what form that took. "Rachel," I whispered into the darkness. "Yeah, I love you. Not because of what body you're in, but because of who you are." She turned to face me, and even in the dim light, I could see the emotion in her eyes. I love you too. Always. We fell asleep holding each other, and when I woke up the next morning, something felt different. I sat up slowly, looking down at my hands. They were mine. My own hands, with the scar on my thumb from that time I'd cut myself slicing vegetables. I looked over at Rachel, and she was stirring, her long hair falling across her face. She opened her eyes, blinking up at me, and then she gasped. "We're back." I nodded, a strange mix of relief and sadness washing over me.
Yeah.
"We're back." We got out of bed and stood in front of the mirror, just like we had that first morning. Except now we were ourselves again. Rachel reached out and took my hand, and we stood there, looking at our reflections. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it, really thought about it. Different, but in a good way. She smiled. Me too. The experience had changed us, in ways we were still discovering. Rachel became more patient, more willing to listen. She stopped assuming she always had to be the strong one, the one with all the answers. And I learned to stand up for myself, to take up space without apologizing for it. Our relationship shifted too. We were more attuned to each other, more aware of the challenges we each faced. When Rachel came home stressed from a long day at work, I didn't just tell her to relax. I asked her about it, really listened, and offered support in the ways I knew she needed. And when I struggled with a difficult piece or a demanding editor, Rachel reminded me of my strengths, of the passion and skill I brought to my work. We started doing things differently too. Rachel let me handle more of the financial decisions, trusting my judgment in ways she hadn't before. And I stopped deferring to her on every major choice, realizing that my voice mattered just as much. One evening, a few months after we'd switched back, we were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. Rachel turned to me, a thoughtful look on her face. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened?" she asked. I considered the question, thinking back to those strange, challenging weeks. "No," I said finally. "I think it was exactly what we needed." She nodded, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Me too." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected experiences are the ones that change us the most. We'd walked in each other's shoes, quite literally, and come out the other side stronger, more connected, and more in love than ever before. But the story didn't end there, because a few weeks later, something else happened. Something that made me question everything all over again. I was at home, working on an article, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I opened the door cautiously. Standing on the porch was a woman, maybe in her 60s, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Are you James?" she asked. I nodded, confused.
Yes.
"And you are?" "My name is Margaret. I'm a researcher studying unexplained phenomena. I heard about what happened to you and your wife." My heart skipped a beat. "How did you hear about that?" She smiled gently. "Word gets around in certain circles. May I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside, letting her into the living room. She sat down, setting a leather bag on the floor beside her. "I know this must be strange," she said, "but what happened to you isn't as unique as you might think." I sat down across from her, my mind racing. "What do you mean?" She pulled a folder out of her bag and handed it to me. Inside were articles, case studies, accounts from people all over the world who had experienced similar things. Body swaps, role reversals, inexplicable transformations. "This happens more often than you'd think," Margaret said. "Usually to couples who are at a crossroads, who need to understand each other in a deeper way." I stared at the folder, my hands trembling.
Why? How?
She shook her head. "I don't have all the answers. But I believe it's a kind of cosmic intervention. A way for the universe to teach us what we need to learn." "And you're saying this happened to us because we needed to learn something?" "Yes," she said simply. "And from what I can tell, you did."
I didn't know what to say.
Part of me wanted to dismiss her as some kind of crackpot, but the evidence in the folder was undeniable. These were real people, real stories, and they all had one thing in common. They came out the other side changed. When Rachel came home that evening, I showed her the folder. She read through it, her expression shifting from skepticism to wonder. "This is incredible," she said. "All these people." "I know," I said. "It makes me feel less alone, but also more confused." She looked up at me. "Why confused?" "Because if this is real, if this is something that happens for a reason, then what was our reason? Did we really need this? Or could we have figured it out on our own?" Rachel set the folder down and took my hands. "Does it matter? We went through it, and we're better for it. Maybe that's all we need to know." I wanted to believe her, but the questions lingered. Had we been chosen somehow? And if so, by whom? Or what? Margaret had left her contact information, and a few days later, I called her. She invited me to a support group she ran, a gathering of people who had experienced similar phenomena. Rachel and I went together, curious but apprehensive. The group met in a small community center, and there were about a dozen people there. They all had their own stories, some more bizarre than ours. One couple had swapped bodies for 6 months. Another had lived each other's lives in parallel universes before somehow merging back together. As we listened to their stories, I felt a strange sense of camaraderie. These people understood what we'd been through in a way no one else could. And they all said the same thing. The experience had changed them for the better. At the end of the meeting, a man named David approached us. He was in his 40s, with graying hair and a friendly demeanor. "First time here?" he asked. We nodded, and he smiled. "It gets easier. The questions, I mean. Eventually, you stop trying to figure out why it happened and just accept that it did." "How long did it take you?" Rachel asked. "A few years," he admitted. "But I'm glad it happened. I wouldn't be who I am today without it." His words stayed with me as we drove home that night. Maybe he was right. Maybe the why didn't matter as much as the what. What we'd learned, what we'd gained, what we'd become. And as I looked over at Rachel, her hand resting on the center console between us, I knew that no matter what, we'd face whatever came next together. Because that's what partners do. They walk through fire for each other. They learn and grow and change. And sometimes, they wake up in each other's bodies and have to figure out how to navigate the world in a whole new way. But at the end of the day, love is love. And ours was stronger than ever.